in that scene too, Dan, it goes past the argument too, and talks in the aftermath, and it shows what a despicable character she is too, because despite what was done to Antonio, uh, she still is sexually attracted to Vito,
Yeah.
which is a very interesting thing that I think comes off of the only scene that's kind of similar is in Goodfellas. Martin Scorsese's Ray Liotta character beats up a guy to protect his girlfriend, and his girlfriend is similarly turned on by the violence uh, protruding from him as well, and that comes off in the same way with Angela's relationship with Vito.
Yeah. Well, the thing though is this isn't. I'm not trying to necessarily portray that this is a dysfunctional family because by that point in the book we know this. If this had been in the first or second chapter, that would have been the point of that scene. The point of that scene is to show the individual relationships, as you mentioned. Antonio is repressed, and I think when I did Gino, Gino ends up stuffing manicotti into the dead rat or something, and he's sort of playing with it off in the corner. And so Gino, you said that this shows his evil. I don't know if it necessarily shows his evil as that he's just totally indifferent to the suffering of anyone because he's not even paying attention. Little Gino is the baby here, and he's not even paying attention to the
Well,
fact.
torturing the mouse is
Yeah.
certainly showing the genesis of his evil, but more than anything, it does show how dumb he is and how apathetic he is to the rest of the situation because he's torturing the mouse while this huge argument is going on. So you're correct on that.
Yeah, and it's also too because there are moments too. I know, like when I have the scene at the hotel and the moments when we see a little bit later on, there's the scene where he gets a puppy that he finds a puppy that he calls Little Gino, and it's interesting because I have him name him after himself, so he's projecting to a certain degree himself and probably putting himself in the position of the father, and just like Vito, he gets a little frustrated with the puppy and ends up accidentally killing it. So you see in this maybe takes place 12 or 15 years after that particular scene. And so obviously you see the perpetuation of the violence there. And we don't find out about, and you get more about how Vito is merely recapitulating in his family what happens in his business in a Norwegian in the family. But you know, you don't want to necessarily be preachy because you just have to sort of look at it and show the things. Because if I were to try to get too poetic in a scene like that, it would dilute the things and would give us a patina to the scene that you don't want it. That's why I'm saying this is sort of like a documentary, and if it was a film, it has to be black and white because uh, there are shades of gray are a lot more interesting when you're dealing with individuals, I think, than color. I said a Norwegian in the family would be in Technicolor, and while that deals with individuals and whatnot, it's about the bigness of life. These are characters that stride the earth like colossi. Whereas here in Vincetti Brothers, these are about the little people that scurry around in the corners. This is probably the most Dickensian of my books, although it's a lot deeper. There's a lot more real violence, and there's certainly humor. But
Yeah, the Vincetti brothers is kind of like John Cassavetes' Killing of the Chinese Bookie, but with a
yeah,
sense of humor.
and Killing of a Chinese Bookie comes into play because I stole the whole Massapequa massacre scene from that, except it's a couple of guys and it's played a bit more comically that they sort of stumble into it, and that brings up the comic character of Tony Luft because Luft is an interesting character as he floats in and out. And speaking of which, there's the scene with the spick that when Gino is running from Tony Luft, who's been tailing him, and there's one of my favorite scenes in that book is where Tony Luft is hiding behind a small tree as he's tailing Gino, but he's like Charlie Brown. If you've ever seen the comics of Charlie Brown's big head is too wide. So here you have this idiot Luft, who's a dumbass but a hired killer, coming after Gino, but we get the sense he's even dumber than Gino because Gino's able to escape from him, and Gino gets into he breaks into this warehouse as Luft is running around the terminal looking for him, and he goes down into the bowels. And this is a scene that I left intentionally ambiguous. We don't know if this really happens or if this is just somehow Gino's descent into his own fears of the dark or whatnot, into hell, because he goes into a basement where there's looks like a freezer, and he finds this individual that's got a single light bulb, and they're totally in the dark, and they get through this back and forth. And again, it's not particularly intellectual, but is this something that Gino's imagining? Because how the hell could this person have been here just conveniently for him? So we don't know. The spick is enough. There are a lot of what I would call Gino, in a sense, is the central character diegetically, but there are
Yeah, it's
projections.
hard. Sometimes reality in the book is kind of hard to fathom because
Yeah,
there are scenes that are clearly
yeah.
fantasies.
Let me
Like
let me just
Gino
continue.
has an
One
early
second. One second.
conversation with
Hold
Big
on. Hold on.
Frank.
Hold on. Let me just continue because it's an important point with Gino. There are projections of possible Genos. Gino could go the way of Tony Luft and become just a dumbass hitman. Gino also, we can see someone like a Big Frank. Big Frank has some of the tendencies that Gino does. So does Vito Vincetti. So does Rocco Vincetti. Uh, Vito Vinci, rather, Big Frank is someone intellectually, not that he's an Einstein, but he's on a par, he's on a plane above anything Gino can aspire to. But you see in Rocco, in Vito, in Tony Love, in Big Frank, at least four possible ways that Gino could go if he gets his act together, if something happened. If one of these girls that Gino liked gave him some love, perhaps Gino wouldn't be a total psychopath. He'd probably still be a killer. He'd probably still be someone who'd end up in the mob, but he might not be the total psychopath because by the end of the book, it's implied in the 15 or so years that Gino lives after the main events of the story that Gino probably might have been even a serial killer. He may have just totally lost control. He still worked within the confines of the mafia, but he was someone who may have gone off by himself, just killing prostitutes here or there. But anyway, I just wanted to get that point in because there are Gino, there are pot, there are a handful of possible Genos that we see in older characters that Gino could become like. Even the Spick could be a projection of Gino. So there's at least five characters: the Spick, Big Frank, uh, uh, Tony Luft, and his father and his older brother.